How about now, Rob? Can you hear me?
Sounds good so far.
All right.
Good. This is interesting that you're outside. You know, it's very Whitman-esque, I have to say it.
You know, the thing about Whitman is he's so large that almost everything is Whitman-esque.
Right.
But
It's like a Sears Roebuck of the soul, you know.
That's good.
So what led to your interest in Walt and in Leaves of Grass?
You know, it was kind of a funny derivation. I in college, I took some American literature seminar, and we read a lot of Whitman, and I wasn't really much taken with him. And you know, it could have been my age at the time, but I really think crucial element was that we read from the deathbed edition.
Right.
You know, and he had bowdlerized his own poetry pretty severely at that point. And, you know, I got an impression of a lot of clotted rhetoric and an occasional terrific line.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and then maybe the professor wasn't that good either. But anyway, but there's something about him that attracted me. And then maybe 15 years later, somebody sent me a postcard and had a picture of Whitman from about 1854. This, you know, romantic, seductive, handsome guy, you know, completely at odds with that, you know, bearded old fellow with, you know, wispy white hair. And, you know, it just sort of arrested my attention. And then I learned somewhere along the line that he'd been a nurse in the Civil War hospitals, and that intrigued me. And, you know, I just kind of mentally made a note, you know, read up about this someday. And, you know, a few years ago, 3 years ago, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago, I somehow read something and I learned that he had this younger brother who was in the war in this very active way. So, you know, I like that dichotomy of the nurturing homosexual poet and the ardent, fierce warrior brother. And, you know, I started thinking maybe there's a story there. So that's when I started reading more intensely and started looking at the letters. So I would say that postcard was really crucial. The postcard that had an image of him really looking out at me. You know, he knew how to pose for a photograph. I mean, you know, the daguerreotypes just came in the U.S. I think in 1839, and he had his first daguerreotype taken in 1839. He was really kind of smart about that.
David Reynolds has a big section in his book devoted to that whole phenomenon of the daguerreotypes coming in, and he even talks about the specific studios where Whitman was photographed and so on. It's a very unusual photograph, especially when compared to typical 19th century portraits. You know. Well, when I was in my early 20s, I also had a reproduction of it tacked to my wall. I believe Whitman's friend Dr. Buck referred to it as the Christ-likeness photo. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's Christ-like. I would say it's more, I don't know, ardent young man. You know, like you might send that photo to your girlfriend or your boyfriend.
Absolutely.
You know, you're thinking about him in a certain way.
Absolutely.
But that was even rarer in 19th century photography. You know, just that.
The camera clearly liked him, as the photographer would say. I mean, the camera really liked him. You can see that in that photograph, can't you?
Yeah. I mean, but you know, I agree with you completely. He's a very handsome guy, but there's something else. He's like projecting into the camera. And most of the 19th century portraiture, you know, you probably see that you had to sit really still.
It's very rigid looking, and that photograph is the opposite of that.
Yeah, right. And you know, a lot of a lot of times, if you see group photos, family photos, the only thing that looks alive is the dog. You know, everybody else is frozen and trying to look proper, and you know, somehow Whitman wasn't doing that.
There's something of the bearded sage as well as the youth setting out on his life's journey in that photograph. You know, I have a note about this, that there's a line in Song of Myself that I think could serve as a wonderful caption for it when he writes, "I am of old and young, of the foolish as much as the wise, regardless of others, ever regardful of others, maternal as well as paternal, a child as well as a man, stuffed with the stuff that is coarse and stuffed with the stuff that is fine." It's kind of like an image of all these opposites that merge together in him in that photograph, isn't it?
Yeah, I still say that the sexual element is what dominates.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. You feel it's a seductive image.
Yeah, and it may be that already I had learned enough about him that I knew that. I probably didn't, but you know, from a very early age, he was acting the sage. I mean, George said that when he was a teenager, Walt people in the neighborhood came to him for sage counsel, and you know, and then he started going gray really pretty early, and he had no vanity about you know, appearing youthful particularly. But I don't know.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. In your biography, you encourage us to rethink certain assumptions about the Whitman family, and one is the so-called failure of Walt Whitman Sr. As you point out, although he wasn't a millionaire, nevertheless, he always provided the essentials for a family of 9 children, and he passed on a number of valuable practical skills onto his sons as well. By the way, some of these are not questions as much as statements or excerpts of your writing that I thought would be interesting for you to respond to, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I was reading a little more generally about the social history of the early 19th century. I mean, the terrible destitution that people fell into after the Panic of 1837 and other times. I mean, you know, this is a really cruel economic period when all these skilled artisans are for some reason unable to feed their families. You know, they didn't understand it, but they're falling through the cracks. And you know, and an industrial economy is emerging, and you know, the fact that you were skilled didn't mean anything. In fact, it disabled you, made you less resourceful and going where labor was needed, back and forth. So, you know, the stories of people who really were failures, fathers who really were failures, I mean, I don't consider them failures, but, you know, couldn't put the bread on the table, are just legion. And, no, he somehow, they always had a roof over their head. And, you know, I thought it was kind of interesting that Hannah, favorite sister, went to a fancy school, and
very good point. Very good point. Yeah.
They, you know, probably their fortunes waxed and waned, but basically the fact that nobody starved to death and nobody succumbed to, let's say, childhood tuberculosis. I don't know. It's kind of it's all right.
It's certainly an accomplishment, especially during that rough time of
right. And also, and as you know, as you said, he passed because he was trying to be a spec builder and making a few mistakes. The smart sons who were smart in that way, George and Walt, picked up on it, and they both were really very successful at that. You know,
absolutely.
You know, so that's kind of a success.
I thought that was an excellent point that you made in the book. Walt's father was, you write, quote, an acquaintance of Tom Paine, which I find so fascinating, and an ardent admirer of The Age of Reason and other iconoclastic anti-clerical works. He was, quote, born on the very day of the storming of the Bastille, and bequeathed to his sons and daughters a certain radical elan. Was that the key contribution that he made to Walt's psyche, do you think?
You know, what a father contributes to his son is enormous, you know, day by day. So I wouldn't say that, but, you know, to Walt's, intellectual inheritance. I think that was.
That's what I should have really phrased it in that sense. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's really the only thing we have evidence for. Walt spoke of his mother as the great storyteller, the great mimic. Everything I have, in the way of a talent comes through her. So let's just assume that the father wasn't, a literary influence or a model.
Was not a literary influence, did you say?
Well, I think he was an intellectual influence.
Right.
He doesn't sound like he was, the kind of guy who sat around the fireside and told the kids fascinating stories. And you see that there's that famous photo of him. As far as I know, it's the only photo of him.
It's always tricky to interpret a photograph, but he does look grouchy in that picture.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I think he looks troubled. And of course, he didn't live that long. It's pretty close to the end of his life, and he might have had a stroke or two already. But he doesn't exude that that gemütlich warmth.
Gemütlich, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
But I think that Tom Paine-ish iconoclasm, something that Walt treasured.
Yeah, and I mean, as Tom Paine was really a rabble-rouser, and a rabble-rouser always has an innovative side, I would say, or often has an innovative side. And so, if we sort of broaden the definition, we could say the father was a influence over Walt, was a literary influence over Walt in the sense that he inherited this taste for rabble-rousing and innovation, especially innovation, innovation both in content and form, that we see in the first edition of Leaves of Grass. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that makes a kind of sense to me. I think to actually nail something down so that literary scholars could sign on to it, it's a little harder. I mean, the fact that the father was a close follower of a Quaker kind of renegade preacher, and that he read Tom Paine. I mean, those are high orders of reading.
Oh, the preacher read it, or the father? The father read it. Right.
He
Absolutely.
knew Tom Paine, but he read Rights of Man, and he read, his other.
How do we know? I'm sorry. Please finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
No, I'm finished.
You said that you read the types of books that.
Well, I was just saying that the father, who's considered a failure, and certainly no intellectual, and perhaps a baleful influence on Walt, a cranky old guy. I mean, he was reading Tom Paine's books, and I don't know that you could say that about many working class guys these days. Guys who work in hard construction jobs.
Absolutely.
So, I think there is an intellectual inheritance there.
What is known about? How do we know that he knew Tom Paine? Is that just something that Walt mentions in one of his letters somewhere?
It's a good question. I think there are a number of mentions of it, and I think
in Walt's writing itself, there's a number of mentions.
Yeah. There are mentions of it, and but we are then. I mean, I don't think any of the other siblings ever mentioned it.
Right. Well, it would probably be much less important to them than it would be to Walt, I would imagine, too.
Yeah, possibly. And, I mean, this is not something that holds up in court, but I've committed a few novels myself. I'm an imaginative writer sometimes, and I know that people who write fiction and poetry are inventing all the time. And certainly people who make their life story the wellspring of their writing. But a tremendous amount of what Whitman said about himself paid out. Really was kind of scrupulous. So
yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
I came after like 2 or 3 years of being in his company in the sense of researching the book to really trust him. And again, I say it wouldn't hold up in court, or you want to have
Right.
more sources.
Right. We can really trust him, except when it comes to his creation of a heterosexual persona, I think, right? Yeah?
Yeah. I think we can get him there,
You also point out that although he was a heavy drinker, I'm talking about Walt's father here, so were many of the working class men of that day, because alcohol was safer than the unsanitary water that came from some of the polluted Brooklyn wells. I thought that was a very interesting point as well.
Yeah, and I think they. It's recently as the early 20th century, workmen in the U.S. and in France. I happen to know a little bit about that. They drank 2 or 3 bottles of wine a day because the wine didn't make them sick the way bad water did.
The workmen in France, I lived in Paris for 12 years, and I can tell you the workmen in France still drink a lot of wine early in the morning. There was my very first visit to France. I got off the plane. It was extremely early, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I needed a coffee really badly. I couldn't speak a word of French, and I walked into a brasserie, and there were all these working class guys, what they call ouvriers, around me, and I just listened to one of them, and he said, "En demi." So I said to the guy, "En demi," thinking it was a demi-tasse, and a demi is like, a huge glass of beer, and that's how I started my day. I didn't want to be looked at strangely, so I just downed the thing, and that was my first, moment in Paris.
That's a good story.
Another notion you've done a great job dispelling, I think, is the idea of Mrs. Whitman as a simple-minded illiterate. Instead, you say she served as a valuable sounding board for Walt and was able to absorb and intelligently respond to his letters.
Right.
Especially his Civil War letters, I'm thinking of here.
Right. I think she was probably doing the same thing for George, although her letters to George at the front don't survive. But yeah, over and over again I saw Walt. Walt would be, in his letters to his mother and to the rest of the family, he was cheerful when he felt he could possibly pull it off. But sometimes he'd write a letter just for her, and he was being overwhelmed. He was breaking down psychologically, and her responses were very moving to me. In her ungrammatical way, she spoke exactly to it. I understand Walt, how you become fascinated with his difficult work, seeing the boys die. It was really painful. I think, and then when I read up all the letters she wrote and George wrote and Walt wrote about, let's say, George's post-war building career. She was right in on every aspect of it. She was smart about, going into debt to finance construction. She knew about gathering tools and finding the right kind of plots, residential plots. She was the kind of mother that she was just smart, and I think, and they came to trust her. Because probably the old bat was right.
Well, Robert, do you think that her letters to Walt will ever be published in an unabridged version, and hopefully one that keeps all the lack of punctuation and idiosyncratic grammar intact as you did when reproducing them in your book?
I think that would be a wonderful project. Sure, why not? George's letters made a very good volume. Came out in 1975. I think Jerome Loving was the editor, and and I think her letters are more fascinating to me, much as I enjoyed George's too. I think there should be. Yeah.
Well, you really did a great job in that sense. That you make us extremely curious to read all of her letters. They're really fascinating, the bits that you reproduced there. You also show how Walt's brother George was much closer to him than previous biographers have realized, and that his writing was not without its merits.
Yeah. I definitely. I think they were quite brotherly. I don't know if you have brothers. A lot of times, people seem so heterogeneous in a family.
Often siblings go their separate ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and and later on, Walt made this comment that George is interested in pipes, not poems.
Right.
But that was true. I mean,
yeah.
I think George read all of Walt's poetry, but he was an entrepreneur and a contractor. But I found his letters really unusual in the amount of kind of focused intelligence he brought to the problem of trying to understand these very confusing, overwhelming battles he had just been in, and made me look at a whole lot of other Civil War correspondence, and you see other soldiers trying to describe the battles they were in, but George's descriptions they're quite solid and detailed, and when I went to the battlegrounds, they really held up as maps. And
they held up as what?
As maps.
Oh, as maps. I see.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
We got pinned down under a withering fire by a little rise in the ground by a terribly muddy creek, and I had my face in the mud for 3 hours. I can fight the creek, and his descriptions and his surmises about what went wrong with battles are often what the Civil War historians say.
Very interesting.
These days. So, I think he had, besides having whatever the skills are of a warrior who survives, he had kind of a mind for battle.
And you say he really did have a gift for literary detail, despite the fact that people like Gale and Wilson said that he didn't.
I found his descriptions really apt and funny sometimes.
Right, you say he had a rustic sense of humor, I think was the way you put it.
Yeah.
Was that it? Let me see, I have it in one of my earlier notes here.
I wish I could come up with a good example, Rob, of his rustic humor, but I haven't read his letters now in a couple of years. So,
right, it's been a while since the book has come out, yeah. Well, it's not important, but I agree with you. I think that there's something very visceral in his descriptions,
Yeah, and maybe you can start to infer his character. I mean, from he's definitely not without humor. So it seems like he was probably by the book kind of company commander, but a human being too.
Yes. Yes.
I described in the book. His soldiers gave him a sword and scabbard. It's a very, very unusual honor for a guy of his rank.
I thought that was a very touching episode that you described there. Yes. Yeah, this is what you're right. The evidence of George's letters suggests someone with a sense of humor and access to his emotions, including sympathy. The letters home to his family, especially to his mother, often strike a tone of rustic foolery. Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably trying to reassure her whenever he could.
Robert, I thought one of the most important issues that you've raised is Walt's inability or unwillingness to allow the soldiers to speak in their own unique voice when they appear in his Civil War poems. You call Whitman, quote, a writer intimate with thousands of wounded men and their personal stories, who yet appears not really to be listening.
Yeah.
And there's several lines from the 1855 and 1860 versions of Song of Myself that strangely anticipate this approach. Whitman writes, I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. And, quote, I act as the tongue of you tied in your mouth. In mine it begins to be loosened. And I think even the opening line of Leaves of Grass somehow echoes this sentiment when he says, what I assume, you shall assume.
Yeah, I think he's very much under the influence of Emerson. That the poet is a representative being, and he subsumes all of us, and he can speak for us because he has a gift that we don't have. And Walt may have coincided with his own high, justified estimation of his abilities, but he really took that and ran with it, and he sort of thought, well, that's the responsibility of the poet. Speak for these people who, in some sense, are dumb, who cannot bring the I think Emerson says the impressions fall too weakly upon most of us. We feel things, but we're not quite stirred to memorable utterance, whereas the poet can do it for us. So, I mean, it sounds like it sounds like I'm condemning him, and I don't intend to do that. I just noticed that being, to me, a very salient aspect of his war poetry, and but I think it's overwhelming. What are you supposed to do? If you are talking to thousands of young boys, are you supposed to give all of them voice? Are you supposed to quote 10 of them, or 100, or 100, or 1,500? I mean, he's a poet who wants to produce books. He wants to, and so he tries to, say the truth, that, trusting that when it comes through him, it's going to work.
No, I have not seen. I thought, by the way, I really think this is one of the most important contributions you make in this book. I think it's a very valid point that you make, and as I said, I think some of it is also, if we go back and read even the original first edition of Leaves of Grass, some of this is already there. This approach is already there. Were you the first person to raise this? I mean, I haven't seen this raised in any other biography. Have you? This was just something that came to you, or did you notice anyone else bringing this up?
Well, gosh, Rob. Oh, shucks. I think it's original with me.
No, really. I think it's a major point. I was very impressed by it.
I don't know that I have ever seen that anywhere else.
Yeah. No, I was very impressed by it.
Well, thank you. And now I'm feeling a little impressed with myself.
Robert, hold on a second. Let me just turn this tape over.
Okay.
All right. All right, there we go. I want to come back to that in a little bit if we have time, but following up on that, actually, in Walt's Song of Joy, in the 1860 edition, he writes, quote, "To see men fall and die and not complain!" exclamation mark. I wonder if some of this is a result of his view that death is of little consequence, therefore one should meet it calmly. For example, he writes, quote, "I will show that nothing can happen more beautiful than death." And there are many other verses in which death is portrayed as an entirely positive thing throughout his work.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what, if you are asking me a question about that.
Well, I'm trying to understand where, he gets this attitude or approach from. You mentioned the influence of Emerson, and I just kept thinking about this and looking. I spent the last week rereading the third edition of Leaves of Grass, and I started to see a lot of this throughout the book. And again, I'm just wondering if you would agree that perhaps some of this approach is the result of his view that his mystical view of death, that death is of no consequence. Therefore, we don't really have to focus too much on the negative aspect of it.
Yeah, I get your point.
You see?
Yeah, I think, it's very plausible. I mean, he had this great truth that he wanted to communicate. I mean, among many other truths, but this, that death is, death comes like a lover. Death, it's greater and more, beautiful than anybody has said yet. And so, I mean, I think that might have been part of why he doesn't let the soldiers scream out and
right.
and be horrified the way I would imagine I would be
Right.
in that sick bed. And I
Right,
think
right.
a lot of people, maybe because of, to be true to that, is to drown out this other thing that, has its own truth and he really wants to communicate. Maybe that's partly it. I think, again, just the need to produce a book, to subsume all of this. It's kind of tangentially related, but like I talk about in my book, I think he really set out to write a regimental history of George and the 51st.
A what history did you say?
A regimental history.
Oh, regimental, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
of George's regiment, this
Right.
very hard-fighting,
Right.
famous regiment.
Right.
And many regimental histories have been written. But he finally, I think it was a little, I don't know, beneath him, or, he felt he had more important books to write. But it's also, if you start talking about cases, if you try to get really historically accurate and detailed about everything, you're going to lose yourself in that.
Right.
And that just wasn't his vocation.
It wasn't his thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, I also noticed there's a certain contradiction that yet Whitman himself was not averse to at least privately admitting to the horror of war. For example, he writes, "Mother, one's heart grows sick of war. When you see what it really is, I feel so horrified and disgusted. It seems to me like a great slaughterhouse and the men mutually butchering each other."
Yeah, I think that's pretty frank, isn't it? But of course, I think he would probably distinguish war from death. Death is a deliverer. He saw, these guys with unspeakable wounds, dying for 10, 15, 20 days, and then death finally takes them. It's like a great blessing.
It's great liberation.
I don't, probably.
His war experience was in part an exploration of what might be termed a death consciousness. For example, he writes to Emerson, "A new world here I find, surely a medium world." And you add that, quote, by medium world he meant a world of the spirit, and he intended to use the wounded soldiers to penetrate its mysteries.
Right.
I thought that was very well worded, actually.
Right. I think he, and I mean, he was, I think David Reynolds probably makes good use of that. He's very much of his era in so many ways. Phrenology, and then the, obsession with seances and mediums. Walt, I don't know if it's that these are things he really believed, or he had an eye on the market. Probably a combination.
Right.
Every poet speaks through the tropes of his era.
Right.
The ideas that are obsessing us in 2010,
Sure. Well, Whitman especially, I think, was doing that, and you can see that in the various editions of Leaves of Grass, how they change so dramatically in certain ways,
Yeah, I guess I don't really know about, thematic changes that
I don't know if I mean thematically as much as, well, I mean, I wanted to get into this a little bit later on, but in terms of, he starts off as being a very provocative writer, and he ends up trying to be accepted.
Yeah.
And there's that, I think that's a very big change, But I think that change also parallels the changes that take place from the 1850s to the post-Civil War era. Apparently, the 1850s was almost like Reynolds says it was almost like the 1960s in America. It was a time of great cultural upheaval. So we see that in the first edition, but we don't see that as much in the Deathbed edition.
Yeah. Good point. And I think that's a great way to describe the first Leaves of Grass. It goes too far and it's provocative, but I think we might have a hard time showing, the Gilded Age, Grant's administration being a time of slowing down and embracing, and the culture trying to healing itself in some ways, but everybody else, like Twain and Whitman, talked about how this disgusting what was happening, in the 1870s was politically and economically, and the money worship, and I don't know that he tried to make himself more grandfatherly and anodyne, and maybe because he was aging, and maybe also because it was a good role. It was appropriate to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think Reynolds also brings up, in regards to what we were just speaking about with the death consciousness thing, I think Reynolds brings up an interesting point that the cholera epidemic and the widespread incidence of tuberculosis in urban centers in the United States, where proper sanitary conditions were sorely lacking, made death a palpable part of everyday life in the 19th century, especially in Brooklyn.
Yeah. There were probably corpses on the street all the time. I mean, not just laying out, but yeah. I guess, maybe that mid-century adoration of the corpse was just because it's an attempt to I don't know. I think
come to terms with it in some way. This prevalence of death.
Yeah, and my crude understanding of it is that you lose your child, this unspeakable sadness. So then you keep the corpse around for a couple of weeks, trying by staring at it, thinking about it, to go over that that threshold into the spirit world where the child, you hope, is now. It's maybe, that's sort of what I think they were doing with that.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. Let's talk for a moment, if we can, about the importance of the first and third editions of Leaves. I've always felt that the first was by far the best, followed by the third of 1860, which introduces some of Walt's last great poems. It seems you also feel this way. You write, of the poet of 1860, almost anything might have been expected, by no means conventional in thought, nor in the emotional colorations he introduced into poetry. The Whitman of 1860 was a wonder and astonishment. The third edition included, quote, a few longer, more ambiguous poems that gave evidence of a doubled, skeptical, half-despairing cast of thought. The great mystery of Walt's poetry is that this new turn, this potent beginning to a process of promising change, finally came to little. That's what you wrote, by the way.
Yeah. I agree with that guy. And I took a little heat from Ed Folsom, who's kind of the dean of Whitman scholarship.
Right.
Very estimable man and remarkable scholar. You
said estimable? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he reviewed my book in the Whitman Quarterly Review.
Okay.
Pretty long review, and he's kind of he found a few things to praise that was generous of him, but he's kind of angry about my statement that really with the war, Whitman's great poetry was over. Except for When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, and but just the way. I looked at the poetry that was written after, let's say 1865. I didn't find any great poems.
I absolutely agree with you.
And in the 1860s, they're just they're knocking you down everywhere you go. There's just I think nobody will ever know exactly, and certainly people will disagree with that, with your estimation or my estimation. But I think the labor in the hospitals took something out of him. It was an exhausting life labor, and then he started to get sick. Too soon he started having strokes, and took other energies out of him. It's amazing how intact he was, how he after a long recuperation at George's house, he really put himself together. And, I was cheered to see him carrying on with good-looking young boys right up to the end. And his letters are wonderful and witty. And, he's clearly a formidable guy, but the great poetry just,
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about that. By the way, did you ever read the Justin Kaplan biography?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, he has a I don't know if you remember, but he has a marvelous section at the end where he describes the autopsy that they gave Whitman and how unbelievably bad shape he was in, and how amazing it was that he was able to do anything. I mean, it was like a veritable petri dish of illnesses and diseases in his body, and he just kept going on to the end,
Yeah.
Really...
I think I must have read the autopsy report. I don't remember it from Kaplan's book, but I think he had what they call miliary tuberculosis, which is everywhere.
Right.
Everywhere.
Right.
And then, swollen prostate.
Oh, yeah. What didn't he have, Discussing this same period, we were just talking about the Whitman of 1860. Discussing the same period, Roy Morris writes that, quote, in their bitterness and cynicism, the 18th presidency and Répondez are light years removed from the utopian expansionism of Leaves of Grass. Whitman himself had undergone a similar transformation. Gone was the gladsome, celebratory poet of the open road. He'd been replaced by a detached, world-weary onlooker.
Yeah.
And unlike the bulk of Leaves of Grass, which reeks of utopianism, Répondez reads like a dystopia, and these are a few of the more disturbing lines that I came across. Let there be apathy under the stars. Everyone who can tyrannize, let him tyrannize to his satisfaction. Let him who is without my poems be assassinated. Let every man doubt every woman, and let every woman trick every man. Let there be wealthy and immense cities, but through any of them not a single poet. And this line, I thought, is strangely prophetic of the internet and a whole generation sitting in front of a monitor. He says, let the reflections of the things of the world be studied in mirrors. Let the things themselves continue unstudied.
Yeah, I guess that's, he's also, that is remarkably predictive, or he's also probably talking about Plato's cave. I think he was, he had his moods, and he was also, he never stopped the labor of trying to find the new avenues of poetry. That was going to, the new veins that he was going to write great poetry out of. And so, it's like, just today I've been writing an article about John Updike, about trying, in a few hundred words to talk about his whole career for some intro. And I see Updike, the Updike who wrote about sexual shenanigans in the suburbs. Then later on, he's just, in some of his lesser novels, he's writing dystopias, he's writing sci-fi, he's trying, sort of doing Philip Roth light, talking about the failures of his body, and and writing long passages of kind of funny but self-indulgent sexual stuff. And he's a writer who has a career that he wants to keep alive. And I think all writers, and so Whitman may have. I mean, he probably wrote out of the great, overwhelming emotions of given moments in his life, the things that were obsessing him and driving him, and so he feels great disgust and distress. I mean, the Gilded Age was.
I think would you agree, though, that I think that, first of all, I brought this up because I thought it goes along with what you were saying about how the poet of 1860 was, doing all these really different things, and we don't see this later on. But also, would you agree that I think Roy Morris makes this point in his book, that he was depressed at this point in his life because, Leaves of Grass did not receive the acclaim that he thought it should have, and he was kind of drifting aimlessly and hanging out in Pfaff's beer tavern on Broadway. So this was also reflective of his mood, as you say, because of those things.
Well, I think Morris, who wrote a book I really liked, The Better Angel.
The Better Angel, right.
I think he's really wrong about, he doesn't quite understand.
Okay.
Walt of 1860 had just written the greatest book of poetry of that
I
century.
see. I see.
The 1860 Leaves of Grass. He had come from, he's probably bitter as hell that he only sold 300 copies of it. But he was, I don't know that he was depressed and then went into the war because of, I think he was in a foul mood because the country was tearing itself apart, and
okay,
he had.
This is what. So you're saying that's what these types of poems are really reflecting.
Well, yeah. I don't know. I think I hate to be vague, but with somebody like Whitman, there's probably a lot feeding that. If we could,
You're absolutely right. Who is to say what is behind a particular painting or poet? I often read, because I also paint. I read art history books, which are, I don't know if you've ever read an art history book, but they're among the most ridiculous examples of someone explaining why someone did something on a canvas. It's quite humorous sometimes. Yeah.
This is a problem I have with David Reynolds, who's very interesting scholar and done, but he thinks that if he adduces all the cultural currents of a moment, then QED, we have Leaves of Grass. But there were millions of other people who were around phrenology and daguerreotypes and paid attention to the secessionists and who didn't write anything. There's.
Well, I agree with you about that book. This is typical of a hyper-rational academic approach to the mystery of art, isn't it?
I don't want to sound snarky about him because I've read his stuff with great interest.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's good to do that kind of research and then say, but I stand a little bit in front of a mystery when I try to explain.
Absolutely.
I sing the body electric, or
Yeah, and I would also agree with you that not to sound snarky myself. I found the book incredibly informative, although it really could have used a big edit because there was just too much in that book, and it was a kind of micro-analysis of every little thing, which it made for very difficult reading. That's one of the reasons I really enjoyed your book, is because, you have the ear of a good writer, and it doesn't have that dry, always trying to be balanced point of view of an academic, to be quite honest.
Well, I have the advantage and disadvantage of being just a commercial writer. I live on my books and to a large extent, and I'm teaching these days at Hopkins, but I'm not a tenured professor.
Right. So you want people to read and enjoy your books.
And just the books that I respond to are ones which rest on a great deal of research, but where the writer makes strong judgments. Tries to decide, and what you say reminds me of the Joseph Blotner biography of Faulkner. I think it.
Oh, I don't know that.
Came out let's say in the 1980s or maybe earlier, and I really loved Faulkner, so I rushed to that book. But it was one of those books that just piles it on.
It's very tedious, this approach.
It's a tedious. Yeah, he's got everything in there, but
I think the contrast between Répondez and the bulk of Leaves of Grass does provide a key to understanding Whitman's attitude. toward the soldiers, the attitude that you brought up. Because if Leaves of Grass is a utopian document, it can only allow a utopian notion of death and of suffering. Walt claims that he absorbs both good and evil, but really, evil is quite ameliorated in his overall vision of Leaves. The portrayal of the soldiers was a utopian one, but not a holistic one. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess. I think my only, I would agree with that. Although my only problem is that when I read or reread Leaves, I found an awful lot of dark stuff in there.
Dark stuff?
Yeah. These. I mean, he talks about. This is years before he saw battle. He talks about people, clots of blood falling on the floor, people getting their brains blown out. I mean, there's just there are images in there that are very raw and not, happy bedside poet. I think, but I think he was a poet who had good news for mankind, without it being Christian at all. So
he almost puts himself in the role of a savior or redeemer in that sense, doesn't he?
Yeah, pretty frankly, yeah. Right. And his friend O'Connor, I mean, basically wrote a book saying this guy is Christ. And Walt, very calmly nodded. Sure, if they want to write that, that's great.
Would you agree that after a short spate of this kind of bitter, dark verse, that what followed was a less provocative poetry, one that he hoped would appeal to larger numbers of people and in the process make him a celebrity, rather than a hermetic poet who celebrated himself only to a handful who could possibly understand?
Yeah, although I think when he was a hermetic poet, or he was always hoping to win over the entire nation. He had the biggest hopes. He taught, what does he say, that the poet embraces his people and they all embrace him. He, I don't think he ever thought he was writing for a small audience.
Yeah, he says, the proof of a poet shall be sternly deferred till his country absorbs him as affectionately as he has absorbed it.
Yeah. Thanks. Right. And, but, I think, I maybe overemphasizing the sexual element, but I thought most of his editing down of himself later on was just, some of the things he said were a little bit too risque, and I think that's he's trying to make himself look like Longfellow. One of these guys who could be served at the Harvard Club, and again he was conducting a career. Walt at age 65, it's time to become a gray eminence. And
so you would agree with Reynolds' point that Walt was growing impatient with that deferment and finally decided to do something about it, even if this meant becoming more palatable and less provocative?
Well, I would agree with that, except again, he's like, is he just being careerist, or is he actually feeling something different every day when he gets up? Do you know what I mean?
We don't know that, I guess, right?
Yeah, his fires are somewhat banked, and I think he knew better than I know, or or anybody knew, that his great imaginative poetry was not happening. He was still writing, and I'm sure he wrote good stuff, great prose in his later years, but he must have known that, the things that had happened in his great poems weren't happening, and so, I hesitate to say that it was just some clever cutting up his jib, a certain way.
Cutting up his jib, did you say?
Yeah.
Right.
Like tacking this way rather than that.
Right.
He was always smart and trying to be smart commercially, and so I think that was always an element in his shaping of himself. But I don't want to say suddenly he's just a hack.
Gotcha. All right. Although the changes that he made to Song of Myself in the final Deathbed edition are, for the most part, unsuccessful, I think it's important to remember that this isn't a completely black and white absolute thing, and that here and there we can also find improvements over the original edition. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, I don't remember good examples now, but I think probably Gary Schmidgall or somebody like that. He had some. So I've seen people show where he really clarified things, and
okay.
But I think, but the preponderance of the changes to me are disheartening.
I agree with you. Yeah,
and I'm so happy that we, still have the original. That he didn't buy up all the 1855s and 1860s and burn them.
Right. Oh, that would be a horrible idea. Yeah.
And I don't put it past him to, since he seems so prophetic, to have thought, well, all of those texts are out there, and now I'm writing this Deathbed edition. Maybe that will be part of my story. Somebody will, will put together as I aged, I made these changes. I mean, this sounds pretty fanciful, but I think he's always he's certainly a half step ahead of me as far as the largeness of his imagination of himself and his soul and what he might have meant. So.
Well, also, although it's obvious that the Deathbed edition is replete with a lot of filler, not very interesting lists of things, and much bloated verse, these same tendencies are evident in the first edition, which also features much filler and prosaic lists and so on. The difference is that the treasures first appear there. It's sprinkled, with absolute gems of a kind we've never seen before in poetry, correct?
Yeah. Although, remember the 1855,
it's slim.
It's slim. And the only impression of wordiness I got was from the preface.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I would certainly, bloated lists. He's got a few of those. Although sometimes he pulls off these tremendous lists with great aplomb. I think, I don't think somebody coming to the first edition of Leaves of Grass would mainly have said, this is bloated and full of filler. I don't think the critics said that.
I agree with you, but I guess what I've noticed is, I just finished reading the 1860 edition, which certainly has a lot of bloat in it, and lists and things like that. And so then I went back to the first edition, and I guess, well, at least from my personal experience, when I first sat down when I was in 17 and I read the first edition of Leaves of Grass, I was so blown away by those gems that it sort of made me focus less on whatever filler was in there.
Right.
But now going back to it, I'm noticing things I didn't notice when I was 17.
Yeah. You could be right.
But like you said, also because it's slim, you notice it less, I think, than you would like in 1860 or in the Deathbed edition,
Right. That's true. Right.
You say that around the time of Walt Sr.'s death, Whitman became the poet of original ideas expressed in Leaves in an idiom never heard before in history of the world. I thought that was very well said. Perhaps you could just extrapolate a bit on this originality and innovation. How could you summarize that
Well, I think that's, to me, the big mystery of his poetry is where did that intimate tone come from? That, it was, I mean, there were good poets. Emerson was writing good poetry, and Longfellow, they scanned, the diction was sophisticated, but it just wasn't, it wasn't like your friend grabbing you by, your shirt front and saying, this terrible thing happened to me last night. I saw this drunk run over in the street. And, but that's the kind of intimacy that Walt, he doesn't have it in every line of Leaves of Grass, but gosh, he's really got it there. And, it's original in poetry. Maybe there are, there's some classical poetry that has it. Shakespeare doesn't have it. Shakespeare has other fantastic things, but that originality, I don't know. All the scholarship about who he was trying to sound like and who he was reading carefully. They say he's reading Whittier.
Well, someone does make a point that this was the time in the 19th century where certain Eastern sacred texts were first translated into English, and that this could perhaps be one of the primary literary sources of influence of Leaves of Grass.
Yeah, but what are those texts, and do they have this kind of intimacy? I don't.
Well, they're talking specifically about Hindu and Buddhist writings, but so in the sense that there is, in Hinduism and Buddhism, there is a discussion of the self, and the self with a capital S, not the personal self, and how the higher self comes through the personal self. So, and this is Song of Myself, and when Whitman talks about himself, it's an archetypal self. It's not just a small ego. It's what in the East they would call the bigger self. But on the other hand, these texts are certainly not written in an American idiom of a guy from Brooklyn talking to you on the street corner, and as you say, grabbing you by the shirt and even trying to kiss you. There's a line. There's a line in the 1860 version where he ends it by trying to kiss the reader, which is just unimaginable for that time.
Yeah, the tone of intimacy is, I think, is independent of the subject matter. The subject matter being the self, or
very good point.
Self.
Yeah.
It's it's just, where the hell does that come from? I just don't know. I find I find it somewhat persuasive that he was just so bowled over by opera, by these voices singing words, intelligible words that were causing him to have near orgasmic feelings in the theater. The intimacy, it just went right into his soul. And somehow, already not everybody's going to be responding that way. Already there's something in him that's capable of being inspired that way, but I think he then tried to make a poetry, a verbal art that could maybe have the same effect. Could go right into the heart, and into the whole being of somebody else, and having the ability to do that is one thing, but having the idea is that's really original.
Absolutely,
that's the start, and that's the start of. That's why I was just talking to some guy I just met who's. I'm not sure. I think he's from Romania. His name is Wojtek, and he says, and we talked about poetry for some reason, and they said, "Oh, Whitman, me and my friends, we all read Whitman," and he's read everywhere because I think he was the start of this poetry that could really talk to people, really talk about the real things.
Oh, you're right. I mean, his influence, one often hears of Walt's influence on American poets, but really it was a worldwide influence.
Yeah. I mean, he was, certainly in the, in homosexual groups in, in England. I mean, well, not just homosexuals, but so many people read him and, wow, this, changed their lives. It was like, so hopeful to hear him talking frankly about his sexual life. But that whole tone, and it's a modern tone. I mean, it's a modern tone, and I've never heard it before him.
No, it's completely unique. Here's an interesting example of that worldwide influence. In a letter to his sister from 1888, Vincent van Gogh writes of Walt, "He sees in the future and even in the present a world of healthy carnal love, strong and frank, of friendship, of work, under the great starlit vault of heaven, a something which after all one can only call God, and eternity in its place above this world. At first it makes you smile, it is all so candid and pure, but it sets you thinking for the same reason."
Gosh, what incredible, civilization. Wow, that guy must have been something. Who was he? Van Gogh? I never heard of him, yeah. Wow.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah. Really, and he must have read it in a French translation, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he read English too.
Well, that's a good question. I would assume he would have read English coming from where he did. Yeah.
Dutch, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's amazing.
This is just off the top of my head, but as you were speaking about this this tendency of Walt's to speak so personally to the reader and the American idiom and so on, I wonder if the fact that he was gay at a time when most people didn't know what gay was and the word gay or homosexual didn't even exist, and that he was such a seducer and so carnal himself, and always, and therefore, because of the times, being put in this position of sort of having to try to seduce people, other men, in a very careful and guarded way. I wonder if this had something to do with this need he had to connect on so personal a level, feeling that isolation and yet also feeling that need to reach out.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I just don't know. I mean, there are a lot of scholars who say that to be, homosexual avant la lettre, and in 1850s or 1860s, it was easier because there was a lot of comradeship and it wasn't a big thing. If you got caught with your pants down with another man, maybe you get laughed at, but there wasn't like a big. It wasn't. You suddenly fell into a category, different kind of human being, maybe an evil kind, and so I don't. It's. But,
who knows?
Yeah, but whether being, like having to be sort of subtle and pay a lot of extra attention in social situations. That guy looks at you from across the room, and is he looking in the way that you're looking back at him? Having to be smart about that. I mean, maybe it made it a little more alert. But again, not all of my gay friends are all with it.
Exactly. It goes back to the point we were saying before about how art historians want and hyper-rational academics want a cause and effect relationship to everything to be seen in art, and you can't do that, right?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. One other writer that I interviewed, who was also from Brooklyn. Yeah, you familiar with Hubert Selby? He wrote Last Exit to Brooklyn. Yeah.
Sure.
He brought up a wonderful point about growing up in Brooklyn. Walt didn't grow up there, but he lived there as for a period in his life. Selby said, New York, Brooklyn, there's the music of language in Brooklyn. Brooklyn that you just don't have in other places. You know, this wonderful way of speaking, this musical way of speaking, and all the argot, the slang, the mix, you know, the mixture of immigrants and so on. I wonder if this had something to do with, you know, Whitman's unique use of a vernacular tone in his verse.
Yeah, I think he's real frank about that. You know, he just he loved the density of New York and Brooklyn, and you know, the variety of folks, and you know, he rejoiced in slang, and that's part of why he hung out with those cart drivers and you know, stage drivers, like, you know, for equivalent of bus drivers.
Right.
That had this, you know, this argument. Yeah, he loved that. I mean, I don't know. Was it more, you know, intense in Brooklyn and New York than anywhere else? Well, probably because it was so densely, you know.
Absolutely.
Populated.
Yeah.
So how is Hubert Selby these days? Is he still alive?
Oh, he passed away a few years ago, but I interviewed him in the 90s when I was still living in Paris. And if you go to my website, well, actually, I'm going to send you my books, and I have the interview with him in one of my books.
I'd like to see that. I heard somewhere that he was teaching in L.A. or.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You enjoy his work?
Well, I read last days in Brooklyn when I was a college student. You know, just that kind of, you know, it's like knocked me and all my friends over. You know? Really. Wow.
You know, it's such an important book because it was banned in England until 1964, and there was a huge censorship trial, the equivalent of what we had here a few years before with Tropic of Cancer. Yeah. Remarkable. Are you also a Henry Miller enthusiast by any chance?
Well, I've read Miller, you know, and I love him.
He speaks at various points in his writing about the great influence of Walt Whitman on his life and work.
Right. Yeah. I would. Yeah, he's a Whitman-esque guy.
Absolutely, yeah. Like Whitman, you know the term flaneur, the French word flaneur?
Yeah.
I was thinking of this the other day, how Whitman is really, like Miller, a great flaneur, you know, just strolling along and absorbing the atmosphere around him. I mean, so much of Leaves of Grass is about this almost mystical ability that he feels he has to absorb, to take things in to himself. Like I said before, the Sears Roebuck of the soul, you know, to just take every element in and transfigure it in some way and hand it back to us.
Yeah.
And I think there's a phrenology term for it. Is it absorptive or amative, perhaps?
Yeah, amative, I guess. Maybe both of those qualities. I'm not fully up on my phrenology.
Right.
I know Walt was very, very proud of his phrenological report. They, you know, they felt his bumps and they said, you know, you're a genius. What are you, a poet?
Right.
And suddenly, you know, we find phrenological terms in his poetry, and I think Miller very much is like him. You know, and I would think the other very different sort of guy who was profoundly affected by him, sort of the same era as D.H. Lawrence. And he, you know, he struggled with Whitman and wrote, you know, kind of a very affectionate, slightly mocking, but loving essay and studies in early American literature about Whitman. You know, he was really, Whitman was very, very important to him.
I know you quoted him in your book. I'm trying to find it here. You quoted D.H. Lawrence talking about, I think he called Whitman the great post-mortem poet, or something like that?
Right. I guess, you know, for trying to go over into depth. That's the news. You know, Lawrence was a
very interesting,
fraudulent effort, but, you know.
I thought it was one of those fascinating coincidences of history that shortly before Walt finds George, his wounded brother George, that he goes looking for, that he pays a visit to the Lacey House mansion where Clara Barton was also serving as a nurse for the wounded. And you say you felt that they had certain things in common.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that vocation to nurse, a very serious version of it. And I mean, they both got the job done, and I mean, the Lacey houses. I've been to the Lacey house. It's not that big a place. I'm sure he was jostling against her.
Huh. Yeah, you're right. Both were in their early 40s, both decidedly unorthodox, disinclined to hand out Bible tracts to dying men, unlike other hospital visitors, and both had a proud faith in their own physical health, believing that they could out-robust the threats to themselves and were too fit to catch infections.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think that Walt died as a result of whatever infections that he caught in the Civil War hospitals in Washington?
I don't think you can prove that.
We can't prove that.
Well, maybe somebody could dig up his corpse and
right.
Sophisticated DNA testing. But look, he lived. This is the 19th century, and he lived to be 72 or 73.
Right.
And he lived and lived and lived, and then suddenly, the body was given out. I mean, that was a long life. That was a long life. He was incredibly strong and resistant. Probably, I think, probably most residents of Brooklyn of his class were TB positive, had been exposed to TB, and whether it flared up and killed them or whether it stayed in suppression most of their lives, it probably killed them at the end. It was just almost universal.
Once their immune system started breaking down for other reasons, that they would flare up. I see.
I mean, that's my understanding of it. And he did have this brother Andrew who died of it, but it was almost universal. I've been exposed to it.
Walt writes of President Lincoln, "We have got so that we always exchange bows, and very cordial ones." Has anything emerged since your book was published that reveals more about the Lincoln-Whitman connection or relationship?
Well, there's a book that was written about it. I think Daniel Mark Epstein, I think is the guy's name, and explores it and discusses the meaning of it. And
this is a recent book or an old?
Yeah. I think it's like 5 years old.
Okay.
But I think Walt gave a pretty accurate account. He said, I didn't want to impose myself on him. And what I found very interesting was that that Lincoln read the first edition and loved it, and had he had a copy of it in his digs, that he shared with his Speed, I guess, Joseph Speed, I think that was his name, something like that. His a really good buddy in Illinois. When they lived together like bachelors, and a lot of people think there was more than just bachelorhood between them.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah. But Walt but Lincoln loved that book, and it was considered a very racy, dirty book.
And he recommended it to others as well, I understand.
Right, he did. And so, I think...
very interesting.
Yeah.
The fellow's name was Silver Speed, did you say?
I think Joseph Speed.
Joseph Speed, okay.
Yeah, I think I'm probably wrong on the first name, but I think his last name was Speed.
Okay. Robert, hold on just for a second. Let me just pop this out. I'll try to wrap up. But I appreciate so much the time you've given me. This has been a great interview. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
Good. On the subject of Walt's mother helping to shape Leaves, I thought this was a very fitting psychological assessment by Whitman. He said, quote, the quote, reality, the simplicity, the transparency of his mother's life were responsible for the main things in the letters, as in Leaves of Grass itself. I thought those three adjectives, reality, simplicity, transparency, describe something essential about the style and modernity of the first edition.
Yeah, and the fact that he slowed down to say it so precisely what he got from her. Yeah. I mean, I think that right there is strong testimony to her importance to him. All sons, have a nice mother, a good mother. After the mother passes on, her memory is precious to them, but they often don't, spell it out.
Yes.
Carefully.
Yes.
And then, as we were talking about before, he said she was making a great storyteller with a natural sense of drama, and he got that from her. I mean, I found her character fascinating because Walt talks about her, mothers in general, but often he seems to be talking about his own mother as this calm, benign, good, solid, enduring presence in the home. But what I saw in the letters is also that she was a snake and a sharp. She got a case on her daughter-in-law. She had this, an adoring daughter-in-law, but the daughter-in-law could never please her, and then she said vile, vicious things about people. In letters to Walt, she expressed herself, and she was nothing like that pious angel in the home. I mean, if you or I was a guest, and Walt was bringing us home one day in 1853, we might have that impression of Mrs. Whitman. She'd be wearing a clean, Quakerish outfit, and she'd be a lovely woman who'd serve us up a nice dinner, and she might say a couple of witty things, and and she was very kindly, but she had her moods. She definitely had a sharp side.
Very interesting.
I mean, as far as making her an interesting person, that's very significant to me.
That's very significant, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read those letters of hers, and I just got an impression of a very complex, rich personality. Very interesting woman.
I very much enjoyed the way you brought the Whitman saga to its somewhat tragic conclusion. You say that by, quote, moving to the country, George fulfilled an old dream of the family's. Once the Whitmans had been Long Island gentry, now wealthy with the earnings of a modern economy, George returned to the land. But George and his wife both died without leaving children behind. Only Walt's brother Jeff was survived by a daughter, Jessie Louisa. Perhaps you could talk just a bit about her final years.
Her final years?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, as I talk in the book, she's very long-lived. She died in the 1950s, and she was apparently charming and lovable. And so when she became an elderly lady, there were people who wanted to take care of her, and she had some kind of magnetism that was unusual. I mean, I thought it was unusual that this nurse of hers, playing variation on the Walt Whitman nursing theme, just took to this old lady and when she and her family moved out to New Mexico in their station wagon, they took the old lady with them. And, she was probably 90 years old at that point. So, there was, the other kind of story that so there was something of Walt's charm, or maybe Mrs. Whitman's charm, the family charm, in in this daughter of Jeff's, and but an independent researcher in the 1940s went out to Long Island. I guess went to North Shore, to Westport. No, forget the Greenport. Anyway, looking for Whitman relatives and found the daughters of Sister, is it Mary Elizabeth, who had lived out there, and there were, as I remember, there were these two really big, robust women with these spookily clear blue-gray eyes, which people said that Walt and George both had, and they were very handsome, large women. So anyway,
very interesting. And is anyone in contact with these women now?
Well, this is the 1940s.
This was in the 1940s, I see.
Yeah, right. And so I don't know. They
do we know? Yeah.
Probably some Whitman scholar has published an obscure paper in a Walt Whitman Quarterly Review about it. I haven't seen it.
So it's possible that there are descendants through them of Walt Whitman walking among us. Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. Huh.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. And that woman who I forget her name now, in the 1940s, she wrote some wonderful stuff about Whitman haunts on Long Island.
About Whitman what? Haunts?
Haunts. Haunts, like where he taught on Long Island. And, she did. It was very like her to have stumbled on these Whitman women.
No. Who wrote about the Whitman haunts? The researcher or the Whitman descendant?
No, the researcher.
The researcher. Oh, very interesting.
Whose name I can't. It's in my bibliography.
Oh, that's a wonderful image to end our interview with. Just one last question, Robert. Which of the Whitman biographies do you most admire, and what do you think of Horace Traubel's memoirs of Walt?
Well, I haven't read all of Horace Traubel, but it's a wonderful source. But far and away the best book I've read on Whitman is Zweig's book, which is about Paul Zweig, an American poet who I guess died in the 1990s, published a book in the 80s about Walt's youth and how this poet came out of being kind of a junk journalist and poorly educated. It's a wonderful book. If you haven't read it.
No, I haven't. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe it's called The Making of the Poet. If you look up under Paul Zweig.
I'll find it. Yeah.
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 That's my favorite. And but there's a lot of great stuff about Whitman. That just and as I say, I enjoyed Roy Morris's book, although in the end I disagreed with him.
Right.
About a lot of stuff.
I felt he really evoked the atmosphere of death in that book, in the sense it was one of the most depressing books I've ever read. I mean, you could just feel the hospitals in that book.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time, Robert. This has been just a great interview, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.